Good afternoon, everyone. Today's lesson, we're going to continue on with our homeostasis unit. So let's do a quick recap of our central phenomena so we can really see how all of this ties together. So close your eyes and imagine for a second you are in Tokyo, Japan. It's New Year's Day, or Ashigatsu as it's called in Japanese. You're in the middle of the road at a starting line, surrounded by tons of people ready to run the traditional Hakone Ekiden. This relay-style marathon, they run from Tokyo all the way to Hakone and back, a total of 125 miles. Each person on your team has to run a leg of about 13 miles, all on your own. Are you ready? I'm assuming most of you will say no, because that's a lot of running. So how do they do this? How do their bodies complete this? How do they push themselves to that extreme, but allow their bodies to still maintain homeostasis or balance? We've already learned about cell respiration. We've already learned that our muscles have to burn ATP for energy. If we're moving and we're running and we're burning all that ATP, we're creating lots and lots of body heat. So how do these runners burn enough ATP to last 13 miles and not overheat and collapse? That's what we're going to focus on today. So let's dive in. So what does thermoregulation mean? Let's break down this word so we can understand both parts and get to an ultimate definition that will be easy for all of us to understand. Let's start with the first part of the word, thermo. When you think thermo, I want you to think about something like a thermometer. What does that do? It measures your temperature. Think about like a thermos. What does it do? Keeps things warm, right? So it's something about temperature. So when you think thermo, I want you to think temperature or also heat, if that helps you. Now the second part of the word, regulation. Well, when you regulate something, you are controlling something or maintaining something. So if we put these two words together, we've got temperature or heat control or maintenance. So when you think thermoregulation, I want you to think this is the process by which our body controls our body temperature. Our body has a main job, right? It's to keep us alive. To do this in regards to temperature, our body wants to protect our core. Our core is where all of the important things are, right? You've got your heart, your lungs, your digestive organs, your reproductive organs. That's all here in the center of your body. Your body is going to do whatever it can to maintain the safety of that core. Now, sometimes this means that it's going to have to sacrifice other things to do that. So how does our body work? How does it react to changes that are going to occur that will allow it to keep doing its job? It does this in two ways, using two different negative feedback loops. So let's pop over to our key vocabulary here, just so we can remember what a negative feedback loop is. So remember that a negative feedback loop is a naturally occurring response in our body to combat a change and bring us back to homeostasis. So if something is off, whether something is too high or too low, a negative feedback loop wants to counteract that change and bring us back down to homeostasis or back up to homeostasis, depending what that change was. So what is homeostasis? Well, let's remember that this is a balance in our body or equilibrium. This is where we want to be, okay? Homeostasis, these set points, which is our normal, is how our body functions normally so that everything is healthy and everything is good and ready to work in the way it should to keep us alive. So then what is homeostasis? Because it's different for everything, right? So for humans, for us, our homeostasis or our normal with body temperature is right around 98.6 degrees Fahrenheit, which is also 37 degrees Celsius. So when our body is at that temperature, everything is functioning the way it should. Now, at some point in your life, have you probably had a temperature higher than this? Yes. If you just worked out, maybe your temperature's a little high. If you ever were sick and you had a fever, you could have had way above this, right? I recently in the summer, I had a 104-degree fever. So obviously something was not right. My body was trying to fight something to combat a change that happened to allow me to survive. So what does our body actually do then? So say I had my 104-degree fever. What happens? What is my body doing to help me stay alive? So we're going to look at now what happens in our body when things are just too hot. So when it's too hot, when our body temperature is too high, say it's at 104 degrees, we need to do something to help cool it back down. Now, our body's first line of defense has to do with our blood vessels. So let's take a look at this drawing. Now, I'm not the best artist in the world, so bear with me, but we're going to pretend that this white drawing here is our blood vessels. We've got our skin above it, so that means beyond that skin, like out here, is just like the outside world, right? Outside environment. Inside, down here, we've got our too hot insides. So this is like at the core of our body. It's just too hot. Our body is too hot. Our temperature is too high. So what is our body going to do? Well, naturally, our blood would come through these blood vessels, right? It would flow its way through from the heart out to the body and then back to the heart, right? Back to the heart, the lungs, etc. So when we're too hot, we don't want that hot blood to go back to our heart, right? We don't want that to go to our heart and our lungs. It's not at homeostasis. Why would we want to send something to those vital organs that's not good? So we need to figure out a way to cool this down. And luckily, it's not something that you and I have to think about because our body does it on its own. So what happens when we're just too hot, our blood is too hot and we have to cool it down? Our blood vessels are going to expand. So they actually physically get larger in diameter. So we're just going to put a little note up here. And we're going to say blood vessels expand. And you'll notice it's written in yellow and the arrows are yellow. So hopefully you'll see that those go together. Now, when this blood vessel expands, it's actually going to allow more blood to rush through towards the skin, right? So more blood can fit up through here when these get wider. And think about it, that makes sense, right? Say you had a bucket of water and you had a tiny little straw and then you had a hose. Which one of those is going to let the blood flow faster and better? The hose, right? Because it has a larger diameter, so the water can flow through more easily than it would through trying to go through a tiny straw. Same idea. As these blood vessels expand, more and more blood can reach up to the surface. And guess what? That's exactly what we want to happen. Because when the blood comes up to the surface, when it comes in contact with that skin, it is going to release heat. So we want that. We want that blood. More blood flowing to the surface. Because we're trying to cool that down, right? So if it's hitting that skin, it's hitting that surface, it's releasing that heat, that's going to help it cool back down to normal, to our 98.6 degrees Fahrenheit or our 37 degrees Celsius. And now that it's back to normal, now it can continue on its way to the heart, to the lungs, and everything is back the way it should be. So what is this called? We need a good term for this. What we're going to call this is vasodilation. So when we break this down, Vaso means our veins, our arteries, right? It's our blood vessels. And our dilation means to widen or expand. You ever go to the eye doctor and then you get drops in your eyes and they tell you, okay, you have to wear these sunglasses. Your pupils have dilated and your pupils are ginormous and take up your entire eye? That's what that's doing, right? They've expanded. So vasodilation is the expansion of our blood vessels. That releases the heat, which is exactly what we want to do. So purpose, like we just said, of vasodilation is to allow more blood to flow to the surface and release heat. This again is caused by either just a too hot temperature outside, right? Say it's like 100 degrees and you're out there, you're not dressed properly, etc. You're just too hot. It could be caused by exercise, right? Because you're burning all that ATP for energy. Your body's working, your muscles are working, it's releasing heat. That could cause your body temperature to rise. Being sick. Remember I said being sick, having a fever could also cause your temperature to rise because your body's trying to combat that. It's trying to help you heal. Now there's one other thing that goes along with this that can happen. You're working, you're running, you're exercising. What else is always happening? You sweat, right? You're sweating bullets. At least I am when I'm running around. So sweat is actually another way our body works to try and cool us down. So when our blood vessels are dilating, they actually help stimulate those sweat glands to produce even more sweat. So you just start sweating and sweating and sweating because when you sweat, that water that comes out of your skin actually releases heat with it. So in combination of the blood vessels dilating or expanding and this sweat, that's all your body working to try and cool you down. Back to normal, back to homeostasis, a healthy temperature to be at. Now let's look at the opposite, because obviously your body doesn't only get too hot. You can also get way too cold. Now this happens to me all the time. I always get super cold, so hopefully my body is always working the way it should to help keep me back up. So let's actually start with our causes. So what can cause this? Wintertime, right? You're outside, it's snowing. What's happening? Say you didn't put gloves on and you're just getting super, super cold because you weren't dressed properly, right? That's not good. Something has to happen to help keep you warm enough where you're going to survive for the time you're out there. Now that's being a little drastic, but that's not going to happen to you when you're just shoveling your driveway. But it could happen if you're out there for a really long time, right? So your body has to, again, combat this change to help bring you back to normal. So looking at our diagram, we've got our skin just like last time, our blood vessels just like last time. On the inside of those blood vessels is our internal self, right, towards the core of our body. And on the outside now is this really frigid cold air, okay? So it's cold, things are freezing, not good for us. Our body has to have a second negative feedback loop to combat this, to bring us back to homeostasis. So now our blood, right? Our blood's flowing through just like normal. But now, instead of those blood vessels expanding, they're actually going to get smaller. So it's the exact opposite of what happened before. So now these are going to pinch together. So blood vessels, they sort of close off to the skin. Now what that does is it allows for our blood to not get up through to the skin, right? If it's too closed off, it can't make it up there. So all that blood then stays in towards our core. Because remember, when that blood comes in contact with the skin, it's going to release heat. In this case, we need all the heat we can get, right? So we don't want to release any extra heat. So we need those blood vessels to close off so that they cannot allow access to that blood to get to our skin. We want to keep it in at our core. So let's just make a little note. We're going to say blood stays close to our core. This will help us maintain some heat. We don't want to release that heat, right? We want to keep that heat to ourselves. So if we keep our blood close to our core, we're helping to keep our insides, that super, super important core, safe. So what is this called? Well, if you look here, I have a little hint. This is a boa. If you think boa, the full name of a boa is a boa constrictor, right? That means squeezing. So what this term is actually vasoconstriction. So in this case, vaso still means our blood vessels, but constriction now means squeezing together, right? Getting smaller. You're constricting it. Just like a boa constrictor wraps around and squeezes its prey, the same idea, okay? It's constricting. We are squeezing those blood vessels together, making them smaller to keep that blood towards the inside core of our body because we want to protect those vital organs. Now, this can often lead to things like frostbite, okay? Because if you think about it, if we're not letting our blood get farther away from our core by doing that constriction, that means we're going to cut off some blood to our fingertips and our toes. So if those get too cold and damaged and those cells die, that's just not coming back. And that's what frostbite is, okay? That's why when you're outside and you're cold, your fingers and your toes always get cold before anything else because your body is physically limiting the blood that's getting to those parts of you so that it can keep your internal core warm. All right, so our purpose here of vasoconstriction is all about keeping our blood in towards our core to maintain heat. We don't want it to go up to the surface and get even colder, right? We don't want it to go up to that surface and release more heat or pick up any of that cold outside air. We don't want that. We want to keep ourselves warm. Now, there's a couple of other things that also happen along with this vasoconstriction to help keep us warm. And you probably know what these are if you just think about when you get cold. First thing that always happens to me is I get goosebumps. So goosebumps, you get the little hair follicles on your arms, the muscles around them all contract and they make the hair stand up on end, and that's actually a form of protection of trying to keep warm air and stuff trapped to your body to keep you from losing any heat. So goosebumps are actually a way in which your body helps try and maintain that temperature. There's also shivering, right? If you're shivering, your muscles are working, they're moving. Right there in itself, it's producing heat, which will try and again keep you warm when you get too cold. Okay? So that's vasoconstriction. Again, keep the blood towards our core. It's all about that importance of the core trying to keep us warm. Vasodilation, complete opposite. Let's get that blood out to the skin, release that extra heat. All right, so this is going to be very important for you guys when we do tomorrow's activity. So now that you've learned about thermoregulation, tomorrow in class you all will be completing our thermoregulation lab. You'll be working in small groups to collect data on both your internal and your external skin temperatures in response to different stimuli. You will need to collaborate and think back to tonight's video and use the notes you're supposed to take to come up with the scientific reasoning to explain your data. So come prepared tomorrow to collaborate, work hard, get this done, and I'll see you all in class.